I did a remote viewing session, and what really happened to Calee Anthony. Well, tapping into Calee Anthony's mind is literally like stepping into a labyrinth of layered defenses, self-created narratives, and emotional dissociation. So I see a bottle of some chemical. I immediately got chloroform, but my psychic impression was that it was something similar to chloroform that can be made at home. She wanted to spend time with her boyfriend alone and without her daughter distracting them, I guess, which I don't know how a parent can do. But I see her putting a rag over her face, and by the way, she's done this many times, and this was it was in her trunk. And in the past, Calee just went to sleep, but this time she thought when she was asleep, when she came back to check on her, that she had her in the trunk of her car, she would be fine. But she wasn't. She was dead. And she had spent years reinforcing a reality that allows her to live with what happened, which makes her mind difficult to penetrate directly. However, I can bypass her surface thoughts and tapping into her subconscious thoughts and imprints. And so when I did that, the surface level defenses are strong. There's like a reflexive rejection of guilt, deeply ingrained, almost as if she has convinced herself of a different reality, which is very strange, but so I guess it's possible. The ego is prominent. There is a subconscious belief that she is a victim rather than a perpetrator, right? And now we get to the buried truths, what she refuses to see and acknowledge, but it still haunts her. So I see an outline search leading to an experiment with a household substance, like I mentioned, possibly chloroform, but something more like it. It was something similar. I just kept getting psychic imprint. It's not exactly that. The intent was not murder, but it was incapacitation, and then she lost control. I see her watching Calee, waiting for her to come down or sleep, but instead something goes very wrong. She stops breathing entirely. Casey freezes, panic overtakes her, and then there is no immediate attempt to call for help, no remorse. Instead, there's self-preservation and shock and disassociation that comes in. And in this immediate focus on what do I do to save myself? So the moment of decision, I felt like a split, like two parallel paths in her mind. One went this way and one went that way. One is like a desperate desire to undo what has happened. The other is a survival instinct kicking in. So she quickly suppresses her emotions and shifts and what goes into damage control mode. So then she fabricates this reality, that is, this is where she builds her psychological escape route. And I feel like her mind actively constructed a new version of events where she isn't at all responsible. So this was the birth of the lies, right? She tells herself this didn't happen the way that it actually did. And also she reinforces it so much that even she actually starts believing it, right? And she has a fear of consequences. So that fear of being blamed overtook the pain of losing Calee. She was more terrified of her life being ruined than what had actually happened. And so guilt and suppression overtook. There is guilt, but it is deeply buried. It surfaces in brief, fleeting moments, like when she thinks about Calee or when she dreams about her. But as soon as it appears, she shuts it down immediately. So now there's something interesting that came through, and that was the role of George Anthony. So there is a subconscious father figure present, whether it's involvement or just fear of his rejection. He plays like a key role in her decision to lie and cover it up, which is interesting because he's a police officer, right? So his presence is deeply tied to her emotional survival instincts. And so I believe the final truth, like the core memory, the image locked deep in her psyche, is this: Calee's lifeless body staring at her in shock, unable to process what has just happened. This is the moment that she will never allow herself to fully recall. Instead, she replaces it with these false memories and emotional numbness, and then a lifetime of self-denial. And there's a deep psychological compartmentalization happening. And George knows more than he publicly admits, but there are also areas where his mind has also fragmented and forced amnesia as a defense mechanism, because he wanted to take up for his daughter, right? But like when I do a scan of his consciousness and I go into deep mind probing, he carries a heavy weight of regret and shame. He also tried to unalive himself, which is clouded by a mix of sorrow, helplessness, and kind of misplaced loyalty to protecting the family's name. And he knows that Casey is responsible, but he doesn't think she's necessarily in a premeditated way, but in a reckless and negligent sort of way that led to Calee's death. And his emotions are layered. They're anger, grief, and then he goes between this internal battle between protecting Casey and wanting the truth to be told about Calee, right? So he doesn't fully ever believe Casey's version of events, and he suspects more than he has actually publicly admitted. And he, on the days following Calee's death, George's first reaction was disbelief. Like, I see him just completely in a state of shock and complete denial, pacing, holding his head in his hands, his stomach's hurting. He's trying to piece this all together on how this could have possibly happened. And then there is a tense conversation between him and Casey, and I see her crying, panicked, saying something like, "It was an accident, Dad, it was an accident, I didn't mean to." And so he's torn because he wants to believe her, but something in his gut tells him she's lying about the details. And then he remembers that his law enforcement training kicks in, and instead of responding as a grieving grandfather, he starts thinking about damage control, and he debates disposing of evidence, because there's a mental imprint of him seeing and considering moving Calee's body. Like, he knows it's in the trunk, he can smell the decomposition, right? But he doesn't want to be directly involved, but he's also afraid that Calee will be convicted if he does. Casey will be convicted if he does nothing. And he knows about the trunk. He smelled it. He smelled the decomposition before the car was impounded, but denied it publicly. And then I also got that there is Cindy's involvement somewhere else there. She also knows more about what's going on, but she tried to cover for her as well. So let me know what you guys think about this, because I thought this case was very, very interesting. There's really a lot of layers to this. But yeah, please let me know what you guys think.